Alrighty guys, today we are going to start into the wonderful section on plant taxonomy, and it's a lot, so get ready. So we start with plant classification, and classification is really important because we study billions of different organisms that are living and non-living on Earth, and scientists have sorted and classified them based on similarities and their differences. The system of classification is also called taxonomy, and it usually features both English and Latin names or different versions of it. It is always best to specify the exact plant you want by the scientific name. It's also important for people in the commercial plant and nursery business to know both scientific and common names, as they can become a little confusing. So we start with this guy. He was a Greek philosopher and naturalist, and he's often called the father of botany. If you haven't noticed yet, there's a lot of people out there who are fathers of different genres of biology. We have a father of genetics and so on and so forth. So he was a pupil of Aristotle, which is probably a guy you've heard of before, and he was the first person to publish the classification of plants. He classified plants based on the form. Are they herbs, shrubs, trees, or annuals, perennials, and biennials? And Carlos Linnaeus, you guys have definitely heard him before. He was the first person to propose an orderly system for classifying organisms, although you probably didn't know that part about him. He developed the binomial system of naming plants in 1753. The prefix bi means two. Think of a bicycle, has two wheels. Nomial means name, so to name. All plants have a scientific name composed of two Latin names, known as the genus and the species. His system is still used today, and he is called the father of taxonomy. So here's what plant classification looks like. It goes from kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and this is what we have if we were to try to break it down. Kingdom Plantae has, give or take, 275,000 different species. And then this is just one particular phylum. This is the vascular plant phylum, and it has, give or take, 250,000 species. If we try to narrow that down more, there's a class called Angiospermae, which is a flowering plant that has 235,000 species. And within each one of these, there's actually little subgroups or clades. So it doesn't break down as nicely as this, and you will see this whenever we start doing projects after we finish all this stuff up here. We go down to order. This is the roses and their allies, family, genus, and then the species. So this particular rose would be called a moss rose. Remember the order. Mnemonics, they tend to work really well here. So in order to help yourself remember how things are classified, try to remember King Philip came over for grape soda. That gives you the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And that is the correct order that it goes in, with kingdom being the largest category and the species being the most specific. So the plant kingdom, it has over 275,000 species. All plants are included in one kingdom called Plantae, which is then broken down into smaller and smaller divisions based on several characteristics. And these characteristics include whether they can circulate fluids like rainwater through their bodies, or do they absorb them through things like osmosis. How do they reproduce? Do they do it by spores or different kinds of seeds? And their size or stature. Are they big? Are they small? Are they heavy? Are they light? Things like that. Phylum. Plants are going to be divided into this category based on pretty much two things: whether or not the plant bears seeds or cones, and are they vascular or non-vascular. And there's over 250,000 plants in this category. Then we go down to the class, which has over 235,000 species. They're going to be divided into two types of classes, either the angiosperms or the gymnosperms. And we've already talked about the gymnosperms a little bit. We know that they don't produce flowers. Those are conifers. They're the cones. We haven't really talked about angiosperms yet. And underneath the regular class, you have subclasses. So this is like a new clade or a subgroup. This is going to be the dicotyledons and the monocotyledons. These are plants with two seed leaves or plants with one seed leaf. And we haven't really touched on that a whole lot yet, but it's good that you get to start to familiarize yourself with some of the terminology here. An order is a group of related plant families classified in the order in which they are thought to have developed their differences from a common ancestor. So they have vegetative structures or reproductive structures, and there's over 18,000 species in this one. Names of orders tend to end in A-L-E-S. Family. Each order is going to be divided into families. These are plants with many botanical features in common. They're related plants with similar flower parts are grouped together. The rose family, for example, is going to consist of plums, apples, strawberries, all because they have similar flower structures. And the names of the families are going to end in A-C-E-A-E. There's over 3,500 species, so we're finally starting to narrow it down, even though that's still a lot of plants. A family, like we said, they're grouped closely related on their genre. Similar structures and appearance, so do they have seed pods and fruits or flower parts? And we're looking at their leaf arrangement as well. Also cultural practices, so the care of the plant. Generally it follows family lines. So here's a couple examples of family names, and I really don't even want to try to pronounce those. It's kind of crazy. We use a lot of Latin with this stuff. So we have the honeysuckle family, the pea family, or the olive family. Do you remember Carl Linnaeus? He simplified the scientific names by designating one Latin name to indicate the genus and one as a shorthand name for the specific epithet. And this is our binomial nomenclature. So why are we using so much Latin? You always hear it's a dead language. I don't even think they teach it in school anymore. I remember whenever I was in high school, they did offer Latin, and by the time I graduated high school, they had completely gotten rid of it because nobody speaks Latin anymore. Well, Latin was the language of science over in Western Europe, and they tend to follow the tradition of using Latin and Greek names. Spelling is universal and it's worldwide, but the pronunciation of it is going to depend on local language and dialect. So I may pronounce it one way, and your other science teacher next year might pronounce it a completely different way. So here's our binomial nomenclature. We have the genus, which is our first one, and then the species is going to be second. So the first word there, the genus, is always going to be capitalized, and your species is always going to be lowercase. Species, it's the basis of the binomial system of nomenclature, a difficult word to define. It's a population of individuals within a genus that are capable of interbreeding freely with one another. So, for example, we could have this Equus ferus, and that's a horse mating with a donkey, and you end up with this mule down here. So they have 64 chromosomes to 62 chromosomes. The mule is going to end up with 63 chromosomes, and it's a sterile animal, so it cannot have its own children. The specific epithet can give us hints about the plant. So it's a second word in a scientific plant name. It's not capitalized, and it's usually an adjective used to describe the size, color, leaf shape, growth habit, origin of the plants, or to commemorate a specific person who may have found it. So here are all examples of different species names. Horizontalis would mean that it would grow horizontally. Gigantica, you can kind of see that that's going to be a big plant. This one down here looks like it would be purple. Make sure that you spell things correctly. Genus and species are always names that are underlined or in italics. The genus is going to be capitalized, the species is not capitalized. So Fraxinus americana. The F is going to be capitalized, the A is not. And whenever you guys are writing things out in taxonomy, make sure you use the correct way to do it here. Make sure that you don't italicize or underline your species part of it, but that you do that stuff with your genus. Plant species can be divided more specifically into the cultivar, the variety, and whether or not they are hybrids. The species taxa, so the cultivated variety or the horticulture variety. Plants within a species that have been selected especially for a particular characteristic and are propagated usually asexually to continue this trait. So that means that we are choosing how they reproduce, and we just want to have little clones of that plant. So maybe the growth habit or the flower, or if they're fruitless. The variety is a botanical or wild variety, a group of plants intermediate between species, and they form usually associated with inheritable differences. They are recognized as distinct populations, breeding true to type. A hybrid is a closely related but distinct species that will interbreed to form a hybrid. It's often sterile and it can produce no seed and no fruit, similar to how that mule was. So here's just a couple examples. So the cultivar, we have a plant cultivated variety. It's written in plain text, capitalized and set off by single quotes. So here's the Rosium or Viburnum opulus. The variety is a plant found in nature. So we're talking about a Japanese boxwood here. We could have a hybrid, which would be a cross between two different types. And the Acer X Freemanni, this is the X denotes that it is a hybrid. So this X here is telling you that it is a hybrid, so it is a cross. It's going to be a sterile plant. It's not going to be able to produce babies on its own here. Next, we have the genus. This is a part of the plant name that is most familiar, the normal name you give to a plant. Papaver would be poppy. This is the plant's group name. All plants have the same generic name and are said to belong to the same genus, have closely related similar characteristics. The name genus should be written with a capital letter, and here there's about 500 species once you get to this point. So examples of plant genuses. Acer would be the maples, Pinus is going to be pines, Lenox would be all hollies, Quercus is the oaks, Begonia is the begonias, Rhododendron is going to be azaleas, Juniperus is going to be junipers, Viola are going to be different types of violets. Think of the plant genus name as a noun. Species, this is the highest level that defines an individual plant. Often the name will describe some aspect of the plant, the color of the flowers, the size, shape of the leaves, or it may be named after the place where it was found. Together, the genus and species name only refer to one plant, and they are used to identify that particular plant. The species name is written as an adjective, so it's going to be describing the genus. Alba means white, so Quercus alba means white oak. Or ribum means red, so Acer ribum would mean red maple. The name of the species should be written after the genus name in small letters with no capital letter. And here's a couple examples of different types of genus and species together. So here's an example of classification for a common corn plant. So you have your kingdom, your phylum, your class. Here is a subclass, and some of them might have like 14 or 20 different subclasses that this plant fits into. Depending on what plant you guys choose, you may run into something like this. Why would we classify plants? Well, we classify them because we want to know if there's any type of disease that they could get, or maybe they all have common insect problems. Are there cultural requirements? Is there a certain habitat? Are there different propagation methods that we need to use? And can you use this plant for food and medicine, or is it one or the other, or is it maybe just an ornamental plant? And you might be thinking, well, what's wrong with just calling a rose a rose? Why can't we just leave it like that instead of worrying about all these genus and species things? Well, that's because it doesn't always identify the plant. For example, this little guy up here, this Rhododendron tulipifera, is a tulip tree in the north, but down south they call it a yellow poplar. It's the same plant, but two different common names. And if you move, no one's going to have any idea what you're talking about. If you're from the south, then you go to a botanist and you say, can I have a yellow poplar? They won't know what it is. A Capricornus carolina goes by all of these different names here depending on where you're from. This one over here, a Nephia alba. In European, it's a white water lily. There are over 15 common English names, 44 common French names, 105 German names, 81 Dutch names. So everybody's referring to this one plant, but depending on where you're from, everyone calls it something different. It's almost like a different dialect, or even an accent, if you would. Also consider that common names are not universal. Many different names are given to the same plant, and many species do not have common names. But when you do use a common name, there are rules for writing it. You want to write While a constant source of confusion, they are often used for writing. All common names are usually in lowercase letters. So sugar maple, barberry, dogwood, ginkgo, they're all lowercase. Unless there is a popular name in the common name that you're using when naming a specific plant. So Japanese maple, Russian olive, autumn purple white ash, Chanticleer plant, pear. Many Latin names are now generic common names. And there's just a few. Plant name changes. It does happen occasionally because it can change based on the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature, which is a book that has rules and guidelines for naming plants. The nomenclature of taxonomic groups is based on the popularity of publication. Advances in technology have changed our knowledge of plant relationships using molecular techniques, and botanists disagree on the placement of plants. Example, the lumpers versus the splitters. So plant name changes again. The genus Aster used to contain hundreds of species in North America and Eurasia. Morphologic and molecular research determined that the species should actually be split. Now there are 180 species in the genus, all except one are in Eurasia. So they made it more specific to Eurasia, and now North America has its own separate one. So this is going to be your assignment, which I have a video explaining on in the next, in your assignment tab. It says on the next slide, classify the following plants into one of three groups: trees, ornamental flowering plants, or edible crops. Two of the plants will fit into two categories. All of the others are going to be used only one time. So here's your plant classification, and I'm not asking you to give me any type of genus and species names. I simply want you to classify them. So if it is a tree, you're going to have three titles going across. You'll have tree, ornamental flowering plant, and edible crop. And you're going to tell me, okay, which column does a maple fit in? Is it a tree? Is it an ornamental flowering plant? Or is it an edible crop? That's it. That's all you're doing for this assignment. And again, I explain that in the next video. Alrighty guys, I'll talk to you later.